The dust whipped across the platform as the train's whistle pierced the dry afternoon air of Las Cruces, New Mexico Territory, 1879. Rose Yates clutched her small carpet bag and fought to keep her bonnet from flying away in the wind that seemed determined to expose her most guarded secret. The journey from Philadelphia had been long and punishing, but not nearly as punishing as the circumstances that had forced her to answer a stranger's advertisement for a bride. A tall man stood apart from the small crowd gathered at the station. His broad shoulders and the confident set of his stance marked him immediately as different from the Eastern men she had known. This had to be him, Randall York, the cattle rancher who had written such straightforward, yet oddly poetic letters for the past 6 months. Rose had memorized his description of himself: tall with wheat-colored hair, a strong jawline, and eyes the color of the New Mexico sky after a storm. He had requested a bride with auburn hair that catches fire in the sunlight, delicate features, and a constitution strong enough for frontier life. She lowered her eyes as she approached him, feeling the weight of her deception with each step. The auburn hair he had requested was now a deep, rich brown, cut shorter than was fashionable and hastily dyed the night before her departure. "Mr. York?" she asked, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. The man turned, his eyes indeed the color of the sky after a storm narrowing as they took in her appearance. The disappointment was immediate and unmistakable. "Miss Lydia?" he asked, his voice deep and carrying a slight Western drawl. "Yes," she lied. "Delilah Lydia." Randall York removed his hat, revealing sun-bleached hair that curled slightly at the ends. His face was tanned from long days under the merciless sun, with fine lines at the corners of his eyes. He studied her face, then let his gaze drop to her hair. "Your letters described auburn hair," he said bluntly. "I didn't fall for your description, Miss Lydia. I fell for your honesty." Rose felt heat rise to her cheeks. 1 minute off the train, and her carefully constructed plan was already crumbling. "I can explain," she began, but the station master called out to Randall. "Mail for you, Mr. York. Been holding it near 2 weeks." Randall's jaw tightened as he took a step back from her. "We'll discuss this at the ranch. My wagon's this way." Rose followed him in silence, aware that her new life was beginning on the worst possible footing. As they reached a sturdy wagon with 2 chestnut horses hitched to the front, she gathered her courage. "Mr. York, I understand your disappointment. It's not disappointment, Miss Lydia. It's wariness. Out here, a person's word is all they have. Start with a lie and everything that follows is suspect." He took her carpetbag and placed it in the wagon bed. "You'll want to secure that bonnet. The ride's dusty." The streets of Las Cruces were busier than Rose had expected. Adobe buildings lined the wide main street, their earth-toned walls glowing gold in the late afternoon sun. People moved with purpose, merchants closing shop, cowboys gathering at the saloon, women hurrying with baskets of goods purchased at the mercantile. "Is it always this busy?" Rose asked, attempting to break the uncomfortable silence as they navigated through town. "Friday afternoon," Randall replied tersely. "Ranchers and farmers come in for supplies. We're heading out to my place, the Double R. It's about an hour's ride." The wagon jostled over the rutted road, each bump seeming to emphasize the distance growing between what Rose had imagined and the reality she now faced. Beyond the town limits, the land opened up dramatically vast expanses of desert punctuated by scrub brush and the occasional cactus. Mountains rose in the distance, their silhouettes dramatic against the deepening blue sky. "It's beautiful," she murmured, genuine awe in her voice. Randall gave her a sidelong glance. "It's harsh. Beautiful, yes, but it'll kill you if you don't respect it." Like many beautiful things, Rose replied before she could stop herself. Something in her tone made Randall look at her more carefully. "You're not what I expected." "Nor you me," she answered honestly. "What did you expect? Someone more desperate, perhaps?" The words slipped out before she could censor them. To her surprise, Randall let out a short laugh. "Fair enough. Most men who advertise for brides out here are either too ugly, too mean, or too strange to court local women. And you, too busy." His hands were steady on the reins, his posture relaxed despite the tension between them. "Building a ranch takes every hour of daylight and some of the night too. Didn't leave much time for courting." The explanation made sense, and Rose felt some of her apprehension ease. "Your letters were well written. Most men seeking brides can barely string 2 sentences together. My mother was a school teacher before she married my father. She wouldn't stand for poor grammar, even on a cattle drive." As the wagon rolled along, the landscape began to change subtly. More vegetation appeared, suggesting water nearby. Finally, they crested a small rise, and below them spread a valley with a creek running through it. A substantial ranch house stood near the water, with several outbuildings, corrals, and a large barn creating a tidy compound. Cattle dotted the surrounding grasslands, and horses grazed in a nearby pasture. "The Double R," Randall announced, a note of pride evident in his voice. Rose took in the scene, understanding immediately why a man would work himself to exhaustion to build such a place. It was an oasis in the desert, a testament to human determination. "It's magnificent," she said softly. "It's home," he replied, then added pointedly, "or it could be." As they approached the ranch house, a middle-aged woman emerged from the door, wiping her hands on her apron. Her gray-streaked dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, but her face lit up at the sight of the wagon. "You must be the bride," she called out, her Spanish accent musical even in English. "I am Mrs. Diaz. I help Mr. York keep house and cook." Randall pulled the wagon to a stop. "Mrs. Diaz, this is Miss Lydia. She'll be staying in the guest room tonight." The woman's smile faltered slightly at his words, and Rose felt her heart sink. It was clear Randall had intended for them to be married immediately, as was often the custom with mail-order brides. His decision to postpone was telling. Mrs. Diaz recovered quickly. "Of course, senor. I have prepared a special dinner to welcome her." Randall helped Rose down from the wagon, his touch impersonal but not unkind. "Get settled in. We'll talk after dinner." The guest room was simple but comfortable, a narrow bed with a quilt that had clearly been made by skilled hands, a small dresser, a washstand with a pitcher and bowl, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. Rose sank onto the bed, fatigue from her journey suddenly overwhelming her. A soft knock at the door roused her from her thoughts. "Miss." "I've brought water for washing," Mrs. Diaz called. Rose opened the door to find the housekeeper balancing a large pitcher of steaming water. "Thank you, Mrs. Diaz." As Rose took the pitcher, Mrs. Diaz studied her face. "You are not what he expected," she said bluntly. "No," Rose admitted. "I'm not. But perhaps you are what he needs," the woman added, surprising Rose. "Dinner is in 1 hour." Left alone, Rose poured the water into the basin and began to wash away the grime of travel. She changed into her best dress, a modest blue cotton with white piping, and attempted to arrange her hair as attractively as possible. The brown dye had been hastily applied and was already fading in places, revealing hints of the true color beneath. When she descended to the dining room, Randall was waiting. He had changed as well, wearing a clean shirt and his hair still damp from washing. He looked younger without the trail dust, more like the man she had imagined from his letters. "Miss Lydia," he acknowledged, pulling out a chair for her. Mrs. Diaz brought out a feast roast beef, potatoes with green chilies, corn bread, and beans cooked with spices Rose couldn't identify but found delicious. "This is wonderful," she told Mrs. Diaz. "The senor said you were from Philadelphia. I thought you might like food with more." "How do you say?" "Sabor, flavor," Randall translated. "Mrs. Diaz thinks Eastern food is bland." "She's not wrong," Rose admitted, realizing as she spoke that she had never tasted food like this in Philadelphia. The heat of the chilies was foreign but exciting on her tongue. They ate in relative silence, with Mrs. Diaz occasionally interrupting with questions about Rose's journey. As the meal concluded, the housekeeper cleared the dishes and discreetly retired to her quarters in a small room off the kitchen. "Would you like to sit on the porch?" Randall asked. "The evening's pleasant, and we have matters to discuss." The porch wrapped around the front of the house, offering a spectacular view of the darkening sky. The mountains were silhouetted against a canvas of deepening blue, and the first stars had begun to appear. Randall lit a small lamp that cast a warm glow over the wooden chairs. "Your name isn't really Delilah Lydia, is it?" he asked without preamble. Rose stiffened. "What makes you say that?" "Your hesitation when I called you Miss Lydia at the station. The way you don't immediately respond when addressed, and there's the matter of the hair." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "I'd prefer the truth now, if you don't mind." Rose took a deep breath. "My name is Rose Yates." And why did Rose Yates feel the need to become Delilah Lydia with brown hair instead of auburn? The directness of his question left no room for evasion. "I needed to disappear," she admitted. Quickly and completely. Randall's expression remained neutral. "Are you running from the law?" "No." Rose exclaimed, "Nothing like that." "A husband then?" "No, I've never been married." "Then what?" Rose twisted her hands in her lap. "A man. A very powerful man in Philadelphia. He became obsessed with me. I worked as a governess in his cousin's home. He began to pursue me relentlessly, sending gifts, appearing wherever I went. When I refused his advances, he became threatening." Randall's expression darkened. "Threatening how?" He said no one would believe me over him, that he would ruin me, claim I had been improper with him. He began to spread rumors that cost me my position. Then he said if I wouldn't have him willingly, he would take what he wanted anyway. "And the authorities?" Rose gave a bitter laugh. "His father is a judge. His uncle is the police commissioner." There was nowhere in Philadelphia I could seek protection. Understanding dawned in Randall's eyes. "So you answered my advertisement?" "Yes, and I changed my appearance, my name. Everything I could to ensure he couldn't follow me. The advertisement specified auburn hair, I thought." She hesitated. "I thought if I changed it, even if he somehow tracked the correspondence, he wouldn't recognize me from your description." Randall was silent for a long moment, digesting her story. "Does anyone know where you are? Anyone who might tell this man?" "No." "I told my only friend I was going west, but not where specifically. I left in the night and took a circuitous route." "And your real hair color?" Rose reached up and unpinned a section of hair, rubbing it between her fingers. Brown dye flaked away, revealing strands of bright copper beneath. "The dye is temporary. It's already washing out." Randall studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. "Why tell me this now? Why not maintain the deception?" "Because you were right at the station. A marriage should be built on honesty, and because—" She looked away toward the mountains. "Because I've had enough of living in fear. I want to start fresh, with truth." The silence between them stretched, filled only with the night sounds of the desert-distant coyotes, the rustle of wind through scrub brush, the occasional lowing of cattle. "Rose," Randall finally said, testing her real name, "it suits you better than Delilah." Relief flooded through her. "Thank you for understanding." I didn't say I understand completely, but I respect your courage in telling me the truth. What happens now? Randall leaned back in his chair. Now we start again. Properly. I'm Randall York, rancher, owner of the Double R. I'm 30 years old, stubborn as the day is long according to Mrs. Diaz, and I believe a person's word is their bond. Despite herself, Rose smiled. I'm Rose Yates, former governess, 24 years old. I'm determined, educated, and despite recent evidence to the contrary, generally honest. Well, Miss Yates, I came to that station expecting to bring home a wife today. That's clearly not happening now, but I'm willing to offer you a position here as a tutor. A tutor, Rose echoed, confused. For the Martinez children. Their father works as my foreman and his wife helps with the cattle. They have 3 children who need schooling, and several of my ranch hands have mentioned wanting to improve their reading and figures. You could stay in the guest cabin by the creek, earn your keep, and we could get to know one another properly. The proposal was unexpected but sensible. And if this, getting to know one another, doesn't lead where you hoped, then you'll have earned enough to move on wherever you choose, with a reference from me. Las Cruces has a small school that's always looking for teachers. Rose considered his offer. It was more than fair. It gave her independence while still leaving open the possibility they had both initially sought. I accept, Mr. York, and I promise no more deceptions. Randall nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. Good. We'll ride into town tomorrow to introduce you to the Martinez family and pick up some school supplies. As they sat in companionable silence, watching the stars multiply across the vast New Mexico sky, Rose felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Morning came early on the Double R. Rose woke to the sounds of activity, men calling to one another, horses whinnying, the clatter of pots in the kitchen. The sun was just beginning to paint the eastern sky with streaks of pink and gold. She dressed quickly in her second-best dress, a practical brown cotton that would show less dust, and pinned up her hair, noticing more of the dye had faded overnight. By the time she emerged from her room, the ranch hands had already eaten and departed for their day's work, leaving only Randall and Mrs. Diaz in the kitchen. Good morning, Randall greeted her, rising from the table where he had been studying a ledger book. Sleep well. Very, thank you. The bed had been surprisingly comfortable, and the absolute silence of the countryside had lulled her into the deepest sleep she'd had since fleeing Philadelphia. Mrs. Diaz placed a plate of eggs, bacon, and tortillas before her. Eat, eat. You are too thin for frontier life. Rose smiled gratefully and began to eat. The tortillas were still warm, and Mrs. Diaz had provided a small dish of spicy red sauce that made the simple breakfast extraordinary. I told Mrs. Diaz about our arrangement, Randall informed her between sips of coffee. She'll help you settle into the guest cabin after we return from town. Mrs. Diaz nodded approvingly. It is good, this plan. Getting married without knowing each other, Pa. She made a dismissive gesture. My Carlos and I courted for 2 years. And yet you've been trying to marry me off to every unmarried woman in the territory, Randall said dryly. Because you need someone. This house needs a woman's touch, and you need— Thank you, Mrs. Diaz, Randall interrupted firmly. Miss Yates doesn't need to hear your opinions on my personal needs. The housekeeper huffed but retreated to the stove, muttering in Spanish under her breath. After breakfast, Randall brought the wagon around and they set off for Las Cruces. The morning was cool, the sun not yet high enough to heat the desert to its usual punishing temperature. The Martinez family has been with me since I established the ranch, Randall explained as they traveled. Eduardo is the finest horseman I've ever seen, and Lucia can outwork most men. Their children Carlos, Miguel, and Sofia are good kids, but with both parents working, their education has been spotty at best. How old are they? Carlos is 12, Miguel 10, and Sofia 7. They speak both English and Spanish fluently. Rose nodded, already planning lessons in her mind. And the ranch hands who want instruction. 3 or 4 men who want to learn reading and basic mathematics. Most are Mexican vaqueros who speak some English but want to improve. There's also young Tim Baker, who's 16 and smart as a whip but never had formal schooling. It sounds like I'll be quite busy, Rose observed. Randall glanced at her. Too much. Not at all. I enjoy teaching, and it will be good to feel useful. Las Cruces was even busier than it had been the previous afternoon. Saturday was apparently market day, and the town square was filled with vendors selling everything from fresh produce to handcrafted items. The mix of cultures was immediately apparent: Anglo merchants alongside Mexican traders, Native Americans from nearby pueblos with distinctive pottery and textiles, and even a few Chinese merchants with exotic goods from San Francisco. We'll stop at Wilcox Mercantile first, Randall said, guiding the wagon through the crowd. They'll have the school supplies you need. The Mercantile was a large, well-stocked establishment with a wide wooden porch. As they entered, the proprietor, a portly man with impressive mutton chop whiskers, called out a greeting. Randall York. Twice in 2 days must be a record. Morning, George, Randall replied. This is Miss Rose Yates. She'll be tutoring the Martinez children and some of my men. We need school supplies. George Wilcox's eyebrows rose slightly as he looked between them, clearly noting that Rose was not being introduced as Mrs. York. Of course. We have slates, chalk, primers, copybooks, pencils, everything you might need. As Rose selected supplies, she noticed Randall in conversation with a tall, distinguished-looking man near the store's entrance. The man kept glancing in her direction, his expression curious. When Randall returned to her side, he said quietly, "That's Judge Wilson. He's wondering why I've returned with a tutor instead of a wife. What did you tell him? That plans change." Randall's tone was matter-of-fact, but his eyes held a warning. Word travels fast in small towns. By nightfall, everyone will know you're at the Double R as a tutor, not a bride. Rose understood his concern. Do you think that will cause problems? Not problems exactly, but you should be prepared for curiosity questions. Some might even try to court you thinking you're unattached. The thought hadn't occurred to Rose. Oh. I told the judge we're taking time to get acquainted properly before making any decisions, Randall added. It's not the whole truth, but it should discourage the more ambitious bachelors in the territory. Rose felt an unexpected warmth at his protective instinct. Thank you. Their next stop was the Martinez home, a modest adobe structure on the outskirts of town. Lucia Martinez proved to be a small, energetic woman with a quick smile and intelligent eyes. Her children regarded Rose with undisguised curiosity. You will teach them to read better, yes? Lucia asked after introductions had been made. Carlos can read some, but the younger ones. I'll teach them reading, writing, arithmetic, history, geography, everything they would learn in a proper school, Rose promised. The children's expressions ranged from enthusiasm, Sofia, to resignation, Carlos, but all were respectful. When do we start, Miss Yates? Miguel asked. Monday, Randall answered before Rose could. We'll set up the old bunkhouse as a schoolroom tomorrow. As they prepared to leave, Eduardo Martinez pulled Randall aside for a private conversation, while Lucia engaged Rose. So you come to marry Senor York, but now you are teacher? The woman asked frankly. Rose blushed. It's complicated. Lucia's eyes twinkled. Love is always complicated, no. But Senor York, he is good man, stubborn like bull but good heart. We're just getting acquainted, Rose insisted. She, but I see how he looks at you. Different than how he looked at Senora Wallace when she tried to catch him. Senora Wallace, widow woman, very persistent, very. Lucia gestured expansively, indicating a substantial bosom. But Senor York, he was not interested. You, though. She nodded sagely. Different story. Before Rose could respond, Randall returned and they bid farewell to the Martinez family. Their next stop was the small Las Cruces newspaper office, where Randall introduced Rose to the editor, a thin, energetic man named Tobias Fletcher. Miss Yates is establishing a small school at the Double R, Randall explained. We thought you might mention it in the paper for anyone interested in lessons. Fletcher scribbled notes as Rose outlined the subjects she could teach. Fascinating. Education is sorely needed in this territory. When did you arrive, Miss Yates? Yesterday, she answered, from Philadelphia. Fletcher's pencil paused. Directly. That's quite a journey for a young lady alone. Rose felt Randall tense beside her. I had planned to visit my cousin in Denver, she improvised quickly, but received Mr. York's offer of employment while there and decided to continue to New Mexico. I see. Fletcher's expression suggested he didn't entirely believe the story, but was too polite to press further. Well, we're certainly fortunate to have someone of your educational background here in Las Cruces. I'll be sure to mention the school in Tuesday's edition. As they left the newspaper office, Randall murmured, Quick thinking. Thank you. I thought it best not to mention the mail-order bride arrangement. Agreed. Fletcher's a decent sort, but he loves a good story. Last thing we need is for him to print something that might reach Philadelphia. The mention of Philadelphia sent a chill through Rose. Do you think there's any real danger of that? Randall considered the question seriously. Honestly, it's unlikely. Las Cruces is a small paper, mainly circulated in the territory, but caution costs nothing. Their final stop was the land office, where Randall needed to file paperwork regarding water rights. As Rose waited outside, enjoying the shade of the porch and watching the bustling town square, a well-dressed woman approached her. You must be Randall York's mail-order bride, the woman stated without preamble. She was perhaps 40, expensively dressed with sharp features and assessing eyes. Rose straightened. I'm Rose Yates, and you are Margaret Wallace. My late husband owned the bank. Her gaze raked over Rose's simple dress and travel-worn boots. You're not what I expected. Oh, and what did you expect, Mrs. Wallace? Someone more. The woman paused, selecting her words carefully. Suitable for frontier life, you look rather delicate. Appearances can be deceiving, Rose replied evenly. Mrs. Wallace's smile didn't reach her eyes. Indeed they can. Tell me, how are you finding the Double R? Quite isolated, isn't it? And Randall works from dawn until dusk. Not much companionship for a young woman used to city life. The implication was clear. Mrs. Wallace was suggesting Rose would be unhappy and leave. Actually, I find the ranch beautiful and the work fulfilling. Mr. York has hired me to teach the Martinez children and some of the ranch hands. Teach? Mrs. Wallace's eyebrows rose. How? Progressive of him. Of course, if it doesn't work out, Las Cruces has many opportunities for educated young women. My sister runs the hotel, and we're always looking for help. Before Rose could respond, Randall emerged from the land office. His expression cooled noticeably at the sight of Mrs. Wallace. Margaret, he acknowledged with a nod. I see you've met Miss Yates. Yes, we were just getting acquainted. Such an unusual arrangement you have. Randall's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Not so unusual. Education is valuable on the frontier. Of course, Mrs. Wallace's tone suggested she thought otherwise. Well, I must be going. Miss Yates, do remember what I said about opportunities in town. As the woman departed, Rose glanced at Randall. "I gather Mrs. Wallace is not a particular friend of yours." "Margaret Wallace has been trying to secure her position as the next Mrs. York since her husband died 3 years ago," he said bluntly. "She owns half the businesses in town through inheritance and considers the double R the missing piece in her collection. She seems very determined." "She is, and she doesn't like competition." The word competition hung between them, laden with implications neither was prepared to address directly. Randall cleared his throat. "We should head back. Still need to show you the guest cabin and get the schoolroom organized." The remainder of the day passed in a flurry of activity. The guest cabin proved to be a charming one-room structure near the creek, with its own small porch, a comfortable bed, a wood stove for heat, and simple but adequate furnishings. Mrs. Diaz had already stocked it with linens, a kettle, and basic supplies. "It's perfect," Rose told Randall as they stood in the doorway. "It's small," he countered, "but secure. I had Eduardo add the new lock last month." The mention of security reminded Rose of why she had come west in the first place, and her expression must have shown her thoughts. "You're safe here," Randall said quietly. "The double R is 10 miles from town, and strangers are noticed immediately." "Thank you." Rose meant it sincerely. "For everything, the position, the accommodation, your discretion." Something shifted in Randall's eyes, a warmth that hadn't been there before. "You're welcome, Rose." It was the first time he had used her first name without it feeling like a point being made, and the sound of it in his deep voice caused an unexpected flutter in her chest. The moment was broken by the arrival of Eduardo Martinez and his eldest son, Carlos, who had come to help transform the old bunkhouse into a schoolroom. "Senor York, we brought the tables from storage as you asked," Eduardo called. Randall turned, the professional rancher once more. "Good. Let's get them set up before dark." The next 2 weeks established a new rhythm to life at the Double R. Rose settled into the guest cabin, decorating it with wildflowers and arranging her few belongings to make it feel like home. The old bunkhouse became a functional schoolroom, with tables, benches, a chalkboard mounted on the wall, and shelves for the modest collection of books she had purchased in town. She taught the Martinez children in the mornings, while their parents worked with the cattle. Carlos proved to have a gift for mathematics. Miguel excelled in history, and young Sophia soaked up every subject with equal enthusiasm. In the afternoons, various ranch hands would appear for lessons as their duties permitted. Rose discovered she enjoyed teaching adults almost more than children. The vaqueros were eager to improve their English, and Tim Baker, the 16-year-old ranch hand, had an innate intelligence that made him a joy to instruct. Even Mrs. Diaz began attending occasionally, wanting to improve her reading skills. Randall was often absent during the day, riding out at dawn to check cattle, repair fences, or handle the countless other tasks required to keep the ranch functioning. But he always returned for dinner, and they fell into the habit of sitting on the main house porch afterward, talking until the stars came out. During these conversations, Rose learned about Randall's journey west from Missouri as a young man, his years working as a cowhand before saving enough to buy his own land, and the struggles and triumphs of establishing the Double R. In turn, she shared stories of her childhood in Philadelphia, her education, and her experiences as a governess. Carefully, they built a foundation of knowledge about one another's favorite books, foods they enjoyed, childhood memories, hopes for the future. Rose found herself looking forward to these evening conversations, anticipating Randall's dry humor and thoughtful insights. What neither of them discussed was the original purpose of Rose's journey to New Mexico, or what might develop between them. The subject hung unspoken in the air during their evening talks, acknowledged but untouched. 2 weeks after Rose's arrival, Randall announced at dinner that he would need to be away for several days. "The army's buying horses, and I've got 12 that are ready to sell," he explained. "Eduardo and I will drive them to Fort Selden tomorrow, should be back by Friday." "Is it dangerous?" Rose asked, surprised by her immediate concern. "Not particularly. The road's well-traveled and Apache raids are rare these days. Still," he hesitated, "I'd feel better if you stayed in the main house while I'm gone. The guest cabin is secure, but it's isolated." Rose nodded, understanding his concern was for her safety. "Of course." The next morning, Rose stood on the porch with Mrs. Diaz, watching as Randall and Eduardo prepared to depart with the horses. Randall approached for a final word. "Tim will stay close to the house, and 2 of the vaqueros will be working nearby. If you need anything, I'll be fine," Rose assured him. "It's only a few days." Randall studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "Friday, then." As she watched him ride away, a strange emptiness settled in Rose's chest. The ranch seemed suddenly larger, emptier without his presence. Mrs. Diaz, noticing her expression, patted her arm. "He will come back, you will see," she said with a knowing smile. Rose blushed. "I'm not worried." "No. Then why do you look like that, eh?" Unable to formulate a response that wouldn't confirm the housekeeper's suspicions, Rose turned back to the house. "We should prepare for the children. They'll be arriving soon." The day passed normally, with lessons for the Martinez children in the morning and 2 of the vaqueros in the afternoon. Rose was just concluding the day's teaching when the sound of approaching horses drew her attention. Through the schoolroom window, she saw 3 riders approaching the main house, 2 men and a woman, all well-dressed and riding fine horses. Visitors were unusual enough at the Double R that Rose immediately went to investigate. As she approached the main house, she could hear Mrs. Diaz's voice raised in protest. "Senor York is not here. You cannot just—" "Nonsense," came a familiar voice. "Randall won't mind if we wait for his return. We've come all this way after all." Rose reached the porch just as Margaret Wallace and 2 companions dismounted. The widow was dressed for riding in an expensive habit, and her companions, a middle-aged man with a prosperous look and a younger woman who resembled Mrs. Wallace, were similarly well attired. "Ah, Miss Yates," Mrs. Wallace said, her tone falsely pleasant. "How fortunate. This is my brother-in-law, Harold Fletcher, and my niece, Penelope. We've come to invite Randall to dinner in town tomorrow, but I see we've missed him." "Mr. York has gone to Fort Selden on business," Rose replied, keeping her tone neutral. "He's expected back Friday." "How disappointing," Mrs. Wallace said, though her expression suggested otherwise. "Since we've come all this way, perhaps we might trouble you for some refreshment before we return to town." Mrs. Diaz looked to Rose for direction, clearly unhappy with the intrusion but unwilling to be openly inhospitable. "Of course," Rose said, making a quick decision. "Mrs. Diaz, perhaps some coffee and those excellent biscuits you made this morning." As the housekeeper retreated to the kitchen, muttering in Spanish, Rose led the visitors to the front porch, where chairs offered both seating and a view of the ranch. "So, Miss Yates, how are you finding your role as teacher?" Mrs. Wallace asked, emphasizing the last word slightly. "Very fulfilling," Rose replied. "The children are bright and the men eager to learn." "Yes, Tobias mentioned it in the newspaper," Harold Fletcher said. "Quite progressive of York." "Randall has always been forward-thinking," Mrs. Wallace added. "Though I admit, when I heard he had sent for a mail-order bride, I was surprised. It seemed so impulsive." Rose felt her cheeks warm at the direct reference to her original purpose in coming to New Mexico. Mr. York and I decided a more traditional acquaintance would be preferable. Very wise, Penelope Fletcher spoke for the first time, her voice soft but her eyes sharp. Marriage is such a serious commitment, one wouldn't want to rush into it with a stranger. Mrs. Diaz returned with coffee and biscuits, serving them with barely concealed hostility before retreating to stand protectively near Rose. "This is quite a property Randall has built," Fletcher observed, looking out over the ranch. "Must be worth a considerable sum now, with the water rights secured and the cattle herd established." "Randall has worked incredibly hard," Rose agreed. "Yes, but a man needs more than work," Mrs. Wallace said. "Family, connection to the community, social position, these things matter, especially as one establishes oneself in the territory." The implication was clear. Randall needed a wife with local connections and understanding of territorial society, not an Eastern schoolteacher with a mysterious past. "I believe Mr. York is quite capable of determining his own needs," Rose replied evenly. Mrs. Wallace's smile tightened. "Of course. I only meant that after 10 years here, he's become an important man in the county. His choice of associations reflects on his standing." The conversation continued in this vein for another uncomfortable half-hour, with Mrs. Wallace making increasingly pointed remarks about the importance of local connections and proper social standing, while her relatives nodded agreement. Rose maintained her composure, responding politely but firmly to each implied criticism. Finally, the visitors rose to leave. As they prepared to mount their horses, Mrs. Wallace drew Rose slightly aside. "Miss Yates, I hope you won't misunderstand me. I have only Randall's best interests at heart. He needs a wife who understands the territory, its people, its politics, someone established, respected." Her gaze was direct, challenging. "Someone like me." Rose met her eyes steadily. "I believe Mr. York is quite capable of making that decision for himself." "Men often don't know what's best for them," Mrs. Wallace replied, "particularly when distracted by novelty. Philadelphia is a long way from Las Cruces, Miss Yates. Perhaps you'd be happier returning to civilization." "Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Wallace, but I'm quite content here." The widow's expression hardened. "For now, perhaps, but the frontier has a way of revealing one's true nature. We'll see how long your contentment lasts when winter comes, or when you realize how isolated you truly are." With that, she mounted her horse and led her companions away, leaving Rose unsettled despite her outward composure. "Bruja," Mrs. Diaz muttered as they watched the riders depart. "That one has wanted Senor York since before her husband was cold in his grave." "She seems very determined," Rose observed. "She thinks his ranch would complete her collection," Mrs. Diaz said contemptuously. "But Senor York, he is not for sale." That evening the ranch seemed eerily quiet without Randall's presence. Rose helped Mrs. Diaz with dinner, then retired to the guest room in the main house that Randall had insisted she use during his absence. As she prepared for bed, she found herself replaying Mrs. Wallace's words. Was the widow right? Was Rose foolish to think she could adapt to life on the frontier? And what of her feelings for Randall, which were growing despite her attempts to maintain professional distance? She fell asleep with these questions circling in her mind, only to be awakened in the darkest hours before dawn by the sound of Mrs. Diaz knocking urgently at her door. "Miss Rose." "Come quickly. There is trouble." Rose threw on her robe and followed the housekeeper to the kitchen, where Tim Baker stood, his face pale in the lamplight. "Fire at the schoolhouse, Miss Yates," the young man reported. "Started maybe an hour ago. Me and Pedro been fighting it, but it's bad." Rose followed Tim outside and gasped. The old bunkhouse that had been converted to a schoolroom was fully engulfed in flames, illuminating the night with an eerie orange glow. Two vaqueros were frantically passing buckets of water from the nearby well, but their efforts seemed futile against the intensity of the blaze. "How did it start?" Rose asked, stunned by the destruction of the space she had so carefully arranged. "Don't rightly know," Tim admitted. Pedro was making his rounds and saw the flames already high. "Strange thing is, there wasn't no lamp left burning, was there?" "No," Rose said, certain of this fact. "I always check before leaving." As they watched helplessly, the roof of the old building collapsed inward with a shower of sparks and a terrible groaning sound. By dawn, all that remained was a smoldering ruin. The Martinez family arrived for lessons as usual, only to find Rose and the ranch hands sifting through the ashes, salvaging what little could be saved: a few partially burned books, some metal items that had survived the heat. "Dios mío!" Lucia exclaimed, crossing herself. "What happened?" "We don't know," Rose admitted, her hands blackened with soot. "It started in the night." Eduardo examined the ruins with a practiced eye. "This was not accident," he declared, pointing to a particular area. "Fire started here, away from stove, away from lamps." "Are you saying someone set it deliberately?" Rose asked, appalled. The foreman nodded grimly. Someone who did not want school here." The implication hung in the air. Who would want to destroy the schoolroom? The obvious answer was unsettling: someone who wanted Rose gone from the Double R. "What do we do now, Miss Yates?" Sophia asked, her small face pinched with worry. "Where will we learn?" Rose straightened, brushing ash from her skirt. "We'll use the main house porch for today, and we'll rebuild better than before." The day passed in a strange mixture of routine and disruption. Rose conducted lessons on the porch as promised, while Eduardo and the other men cleared away the ruins of the schoolhouse and began planning its replacement. Mrs. Diaz prepared meals and muttered darkly about jealous witches in town. That night, after the Martinez family had departed and the ranch had grown quiet, Rose sat alone on the porch, watching the stars appear one by one in the vast New Mexico sky. The events of the day had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. If Eduardo was right and the fire had been deliberately set, it represented a level of hostility she hadn't anticipated. The sound of approaching hoofbeats startled her from her thoughts. Rose stood, peering into the gathering darkness, her heart racing. The ranch hands were all accounted for, and visitors rarely came so late. A lone rider emerged from the shadows, and Rose's breath caught in her throat. Even in the dim light, she recognized Randall's broad-shouldered silhouette and the distinctive gait of his favorite horse. "Randall," she called, forgetting formality in her relief. He dismounted quickly, handing the reins to Tim, who had appeared from the bunkhouse. "I heard about the fire in town," he said without preamble. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Rose assured him. "We all are, but the schoolhouse." "To hell with the schoolhouse," Randall said roughly. "Buildings can be rebuilt." The intensity in his voice surprised her. "You rode all the way from Fort Selden today," left at first light. "Eduardo stayed with the horses. They'll arrive tomorrow." Randall stepped closer, his eyes scanning her face as if searching for injuries. "When I heard, I thought." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Rose could read the fear in his expression, the concern that had driven him to ride hard all day to reach her. "I'm truly unharmed," she said softly. Randall's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Good. Now tell me exactly what happened." They sat on the porch while Rose recounted the events: the fire, Eduardo's conclusion that it had been deliberately set, and the day's activities. Randall listened intently, asking occasional questions but mostly absorbing the information in silence. "And the day before, Mrs. Wallace visited with her brother-in-law and niece," Rose concluded. She was, quite direct about her belief that I don't belong here. Randall's expression darkened. Margaret Wallace has overstepped. You think she was responsible for the fire. I think it's a remarkable coincidence that she visits, makes veiled threats, and the schoolhouse burns the same night. Randall's jaw was set in a hard line. Margaret has wanted the double R in me for years. She's used to getting what she wants. What will you do? First, we'll rebuild the schoolhouse bigger and better. Then I'll have a word with Judge Wilson about investigating the fire. Randall's eyes met hers, intense in the lamplight. And then I'll make it clear to everyone in the territory that you belong here, if that's what you want. The last phrase hung between them, a question within a statement. Rose felt her heart beating faster as she considered her answer. It is what I want, she said quietly. I've found something here I never expected, not just safety but purpose. The children, the men learning to read this land. She hesitated, then added softly, you. Randall reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. His palm was calloused from years of ranch work, but his touch was gentle. When I got word about the fire, all I could think about was getting back to you. Not the ranch, not the buildings you. Rose looked down at their joined hands. I was so relieved to see you riding in. The ranch feels empty when you're away. Rose, Randall said, his voice low. I didn't fall for your description in those letters. I fell for the woman who wrote them, intelligent, determined, honest in everything that mattered. That woman is you, regardless of the color of your hair. Rose felt tears prick at her eyes. Even though I arrived under false pretenses, you arrived seeking safety and a new beginning. There's no dishonesty in that. Randall's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. These past weeks, getting to know you properly, it's been better than any rushed marriage could have been. So where does that leave us now? Randall smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. Courting, I believe, is the term, if you're amenable. Rose returned his smile, feeling a lightness in her chest she hadn't experienced in months. I'm amenable, Mr. York, very amenable indeed. The rebuilding of the schoolhouse became a community effort. Word of the fire spread through Las Cruces, and many who had read about Rose's teaching in the newspaper came to offer assistance. Men arrived with tools and lumber, women brought food for the workers, and even Judge Wilson rode out to express his concern and offer support. Notably absent were Margaret Wallace and her relatives, a fact not lost on anyone. The judge had initiated an investigation into the fire, and though proof was difficult to establish, suspicion fell heavily on the widow. Throughout the rebuilding, Randall was a constant presence, dividing his time between ranch work and overseeing the construction. He and Rose spent their evenings together, sometimes with others present, often alone on the porch of the main house, talking until the stars wheeled overhead. Their courtship progressed with a natural rhythm. Randall began joining Rose's lessons occasionally, sitting at the back of the temporary classroom on the porch, ostensibly to learn alongside his men but actually watching Rose with undisguised admiration. He took her riding across the ranch lands, showing her his favorite places: a hidden spring surrounded by cottonwoods, a high ridge with views that stretched to the distant mountains, a quiet bend in the creek where deer came to drink at dusk. Rose found herself falling in love not just with Randall, but with the land itself, its harsh beauty, its challenges, its breathtaking vistas. The Double R ceased to be simply a place of refuge and became home. 3 weeks after the fire, the new schoolhouse stood completed, larger than before, with proper windows, a sturdy door with a lock, and even a small bell to call students to lessons. The community gathered for a small celebration, with Mrs. Diaz organizing a feast and Judge Wilson making a speech about the importance of education in the territory. As the celebration wound down and guests began to depart, Randall drew Rose aside, leading her to a quiet spot near the creek. "I have something to ask you," he said, his usually confident voice tinged with nervousness. "These past weeks getting to know you, watching you face challenges with courage, seeing how you've made a place for yourself here, they've only confirmed what I suspected from your letters." "And what is that?" Rose asked, though her racing heart suggested she already knew. "That you're the woman I want to share my life with." Randall took both her hands in his. "I'm not asking because of any mail-order arrangement or because it's convenient. I'm asking because I love you, Rose Yates." "Will you marry me?" Joy bubbled up within Rose, bright and unstoppable. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will." Randall's face broke into a rare, full smile, and he pulled her into his arms. Their first kiss was gentle, a promise of deeper passion to come, but perfect in its sweetness. When they returned to the gathering, hand in hand, Mrs. Diaz took one look at their faces and let out a cry of delight, rushing to embrace them both. Word spread quickly through the remaining guests, and Judge Wilson insisted on performing the ceremony as soon as possible. "No sense in waiting," the judge declared. "I can have the paperwork ready by next Sunday. We'll do it right here at the Double R." The week that followed passed in a blur of preparations. Rose moved her belongings from the guest cabin to the main house, where she would live after the wedding. Mrs. Diaz bustled about, cleaning and cooking and offering advice on married life that made Rose blush to the roots of her hair. Lucia Martinez and several women from town helped Rose alter her best dress for the ceremony, adding lace from their own treasured collections. On the Saturday before the wedding, Rose was helping Mrs. Diaz in the kitchen when the sound of an approaching carriage drew their attention. Through the window, she saw an elegant two-horse rig pulling up to the house, with Margaret Wallace at the reins and her brother-in-law beside her. "Dios mío," Mrs. Diaz muttered, "the witch returns." Rose straightened her apron. "I'll speak with them." "I will get Señor York," the housekeeper said firmly, heading toward the door. "No," Rose stopped her. "I can handle this." She stepped onto the porch just as Mrs. Wallace and Fletcher dismounted. The widow was dressed as if for a social call in town, her expensive outfit distinctly out of place on the working ranch. "Miss Yates," Mrs. Wallace greeted her with false warmth. "Or should I say the future Mrs. York? News travels fast in small communities." "Mrs. Wallace, Mr. Fletcher," Rose acknowledged them. "This is an unexpected visit. We couldn't let your wedding approach without offering our congratulations," Fletcher said, his tone suggesting anything but sincere good wishes, "and to deliver some news that might be of interest." Rose's guard immediately rose. "Oh, yes," Mrs. Wallace picked up smoothly. "Harold received a letter from his cousin in Philadelphia yesterday. Apparently there's quite a stir about a missing woman, the former governess to a prominent family. The man she accused has been quite distraught." Rose felt her blood run cold. "I'm afraid I don't know what that has to do with me." "Don't you?" Mrs. Wallace's smile was predatory. The description was quite specific. Young, educated, originally with striking auburn hair. Fletcher stepped forward, his expression grave. "It would be unfortunate if word reached Philadelphia that the missing woman had been located in New Mexico, particularly given the gentleman's connections and resources." The threat was unmistakable. They were proposing to reveal Rose's location to her persecutor unless— "What is it you want?" Rose asked directly. "Simply for you to reconsider this hasty marriage," Mrs. Wallace replied. "Randall deserves a wife without complications, someone established in the territory, someone whose past won't bring scandal to his doorstep." "Someone like you," Rose stated flatly. Precisely. The widow's confidence was absolute. You needn't leave empty-handed. Harold's newspaper could use someone with your education. We would ensure you were comfortable, established elsewhere in the territory. And if I refuse, then I fear Harold's cousin might feel obligated to share what he knows with his Philadelphia acquaintances. Mrs. Wallace shrugged elegantly. It would be regrettable, but sometimes one must do the proper thing, regardless of personal feelings. Before Rose could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps made them all turn. Randall stood a few yards away, his expression thunderous. Behind him, Eduardo and two other ranch hands waited, their postures suggesting they were prepared for trouble. Margaret Fletcher, Randall acknowledged them coldly. I wasn't aware we had an appointment. Randall, dear, Mrs. Wallace's tone shifted immediately to one of concern. We were just having a friendly chat with your fiancé, offering our congratulations. Is that so? Randall moved to stand beside Rose, his presence solid and reassuring. Because from where I was standing, it sounded remarkably like blackmail. Fletcher paled. Now see here, York. No, you see here, Randall interrupted, his voice dangerously quiet. I heard enough to understand what you're threatening. Let me be perfectly clear. Rose is going to be my wife. Any threat to her is a threat to me, and I protect what's mine. Mrs. Wallace's composure slipped for the first time. You can't possibly want to marry a woman who brings such scandal with her. Think of your position in the territory, your future prospects. My future prospects include building this ranch with a woman I love and respect, Randall replied evenly. As for scandal, the only scandal I'm concerned about is the one that will erupt when Judge Wilson hears about your threats, not to mention your probable involvement in burning down my schoolhouse. Fletcher took a step back. Now, that's an unfounded accusation, is it? The judge has been collecting evidence. Seems one of your stable hands was seen riding in this direction the night of the fire. He's suddenly flush with money no one can explain. The newspaper editor's face grew even paler. Margaret assured me that was just to deliver a message. Harold, Mrs. Wallace hissed. Enough, Randall said firmly. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave my property and you're going to forget any notions of contacting anyone in Philadelphia. Because if you do, I will personally ensure that every newspaper in the territory receives the full story of your attempted blackmail and arson. Mrs. Wallace drew herself up, attempting to salvage her dignity. You're making a terrible mistake, Randall. This woman will bring you nothing but trouble. The only trouble on my ranch right now is standing right in front of me, Randall replied. Eduardo will escort you to the boundary. Don't come back. The foreman stepped forward, his expression leaving no room for argument. Defeated, Mrs. Wallace and Fletcher returned to their carriage and departed, Eduardo and the other men following to ensure they left the property. Once they were gone, Randall turned to Rose, concern evident in his expression. Are you all right? Yes, she said, though her hands trembled slightly. Do you think they'll actually contact Philadelphia? Randall shook his head. Fletcher has too much to lose. If he's implicated in the fire, he could face prison. As for Margaret, her standing in the community is everything to her. She won't risk scandal. But what if she does? What if he finds me? Randall took her hands in his grip warm and steady. Then we face it together. This is your home now, Rose, our home. I won't let anyone take that from you. The simple declaration, spoken with such certainty, eased the knot of fear in Rose's chest. I love you, she said, the words coming easily now. And I love you, Randall replied. Nothing changes that, not your past, not Margaret Wallace, not anything. The next day dawned clear and beautiful, as if the land itself was blessing their union. The wedding was held in the afternoon, with the new schoolhouse serving as an impromptu chapel. Judge Wilson performed the ceremony, his formal legal phrases softened by genuine affection for the couple. Rose wore her altered dress, with wildflowers in her hair, her natural auburn now fully visible, the temporary dye long faded. Randall stood tall in his best suit, his eyes never leaving hers as they spoke their vows. The small gathering of friends and neighbors erupted in cheers as Judge Wilson pronounced them husband and wife. Mrs. Diaz wept openly, declaring it the happiest day on the Double R since Randall had first purchased the land. The celebration continued into the evening, with music provided by the vaqueros on guitar and fiddle, dancing on the packed earth of the ranch yard, and enough food to feed twice their number. As darkness fell and lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the festivities, Randall drew Rose aside. "Happy?" he asked, his arms around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. "When I left Philadelphia, I was only thinking of escape. I never imagined I would find this: home, purpose, love. When I sent for a mail-order bride with auburn hair," Randall said with a smile, "I never imagined I'd end up falling in love with a brown-haired schoolteacher with enough courage for 10 women." Rose laughed softly. "So you're not disappointed your bride didn't match the description?" "The only thing that matters is that she matches me," Randall replied, his voice growing serious. "And you do, Rose York, in every way that counts." As they rejoined the celebration, Rose looked around at the faces of those who had become her community, the Martinez family, the vaqueros and ranch hands, Mrs. Diaz beaming with approval, even Judge Wilson who had championed their cause. The threats from her past seemed distant now, unable to touch the life she had built here. Later, as they stood on the porch of what was now their home, watching the last of the guests depart, Randall pulled Rose close. "Welcome home, Mrs. York," he said softly. "I've been home since the moment I met you," she replied. "I just didn't know it yet." In the years that followed, the Double R flourished under their joint care. Rose's school grew to serve children from neighboring ranches as well, eventually becoming a proper school with a second teacher hired to help when Rose was occupied with other duties, particularly after the birth of their first child. A son they named James, followed 2 years later by a daughter, Catherine. The threat from Philadelphia never materialized. Whether Margaret Wallace had thought better of her schemes or simply found other targets for her ambitions, she never again attempted to interfere in their lives. She sold her properties in Las Cruces and moved to Santa Fe, where it was rumored she eventually married a territorial official. Rose's past remained in the past, allowing her to build a future rooted in truth and love. The auburn-haired woman who had once fled in fear had found not just safety but joy, purpose, and a love that had begun with a misunderstanding but grew into something far more powerful than either of them could have imagined from a simple advertisement for a mail-order bride. And when visitors to the Double R remarked on the striking color of Mrs. York's hair, Randall would often smile and say, "Yes, it's beautiful, isn't it? But I didn't fall for her description. I fell for her heart." And Rose would blush, remembering how their journey together had begun with a deception born of desperation that had led, against all odds, to the truest thing she had ever known.